Welcome back, friends, to the Global Glory Chasers podcast. I'm so excited to be here in the studio today with a new friend of mine, and she's going to join me as we just delve into this adventure, feasting on the glory of God. I am hosting conversations with artists, chefs, authors, teachers, and others during this season that really focus on food, books, and travel. So if you are interested in seeing the Imago Dei in the people and the cultures around the world, these are conversations that are crafted especially for you. And I also just want to remind you to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast so you don't miss an episode. These episodes drop every Wednesday, and we have fun new conversations that we want to share with you. So today I have my friend Chrissy here with me in the studio. She is a food enthusiast. She is a community cultivator. And through teaching cooking classes and writing on her blog, speaking at events, and mentoring young women, she has this opportunity to really inspire others to create delicious food, to gather with purpose, and to host with confidence. She has lived in multiple regions across the United States, and she has traveled to numerous countries across the world, including places in Europe and Asia. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the broadcast. And all of these experiences have taught her how to nurture meaningful relationships and to cultivate authentic community around good food. So if you know me, you know that this sister preaches my heart, and I'm so excited for this time that we have together. Chrissy, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being with me here today.
Thank you, Dorina. I am, of course, thrilled to get to talk about the things that we love together. So thanks for having me. It's such a treat.
Yes, this is so fun. Okay, so we have to share a little bit about how we met each other because this is actually recent that this happened. And I'm so excited that we get to jump on the podcast and talk about this a little bit. How did our paths cross?
So we both found ourselves at the Open Door Sisterhood Retreat. I was there attending for the first time, and you and your sister were there as our chefs extraordinaire. I mean, you two just fed us in so many ways, but mostly through delicious food and how much you love doing that. So that's how we connected. I mean, immediately we started talking about food and recipes, and I had, I'm sure, a million questions and hovered over you in the kitchen because that is one of my lanes that I love to go in. And so then we started just talking about life and our interests, and I think that really even further connected.
Well, this is my third year. I actually got to be a part of the Open Door Sisterhood Retreat. So I attended a few years ago, and I was sitting in Chrissy's spot. I was attending, and this is a gathering that is put together by our friends Krista Gilbert and Alex Kirkendall. They have the Open Door Sisterhood, and they love on women who are writers and speakers. And so this beautiful retreat is crafted. It's an invitation only retreat, actually. But each year women get to refer sort of the next group. And it is a time where we get to learn together kind of through a mastermind cohort, as well as a time that we get to rest and refresh. So I got to go that first year, and kind of how you were describing, it's like I got to see these two sisters, and they were chefs, and they were there to feed us, to nourish our souls. And for us as women and mamas, many of us who attend the retreat, to have 3 meals a day that are provided, that are thoughtfully prepared and planned. You don't even have to do any grocery shopping. Like, it's such a gift. And even if you love cooking, like you and I do, it's a gift to have someone else just care for us in that way. And so I got to observe that Abby and April did that the first year. And as I was going through the retreat myself, I was thinking, I want to be that person. I want to be in the kitchen serving the women in that special way. And I've worked in restaurants before. I have a little bit of experience in catering, but nothing compares to this, where it's people who are so grateful for your food, where you get to be a little bit creative in presenting some different dishes. And also, most importantly, which I know you talk about this a lot, in your work is that we get the chance to nourish together in community. And so that's why I thought it would be really fun to have you in this conversation after you have just received that and got to experience it. But I can always tell who the foodie people are in the crew because they are the ones wandering into the kitchen like I was that first year. Last year, we had a couple of different friends, like my friend Anna, who is a cookbook author,
Mm-hmm.
and Kristen and others who like to do food and meal planning, who were always coming into the kitchen with us. And then this year, it was Chrissy and Krista and a couple others who were like asking the questions. And she even did an awesome food demo. But just by way of introduction, I want people to get to know you a little bit more. So tell us about your season of life, anything you want to share about your family or your work.
Okay, well, my husband and I live in Texas, and we have 5 kids, and we have 2 bonus kids by way of married children, and we have a grandbaby and one on the way. Our life looks a little like straddling the empty nester fence right now because we have one that's still at home. She's a junior in high school, and so we still have games and teenage stuff and school events, but then the rest of our kids they're starter adults and we're still connected with them. And by the grace of God, they all live nearby for the moment. And so we get to see them regularly. My husband actually recently retired. Our youngest, who's the only one at home, she's a junior in high school. So she's driving and independent. And we now kind of have some capacity and bandwidth to do some other things. I would say over the past maybe 15 years, in some capacity, we've been involved in marriage ministry. I mean, the Lord just opened that door for us. We had to work through a lot of hard things in our own marriage, and God redeems all of that, and He decided to use it. So now that we have a little bit more capacity in this season, we have really poured into the lives of especially young married couples, and just it's a critical stage of life and we want to kind of rally around them. So we get to speak and do events related to marriage ministry. Our house, we love hosting, we love gatherings, and so our home, although we're kind of entering the empty nest stage, it's still bustling with activity. We still have things going on regularly. So our house is never really dull or too quiet, but that's part of who God made us. And so, we may live that way till the end of time. Who knows?
You know what I love is that I see, and I've never been in your home before, but I see in the way that you talk about your family and you talk about your ministry that it starts at the table. And whoever's at your table, that you and even your husband, you are extending that ministry to those people who are there at the table. So whether that's the young people or married couples or others, that you are just stepping into that as a calling. And I wonder if we could dig into a little bit of your backstory so we can understand kind of where that came from. I always like to ask my guests what their cultural heritage is, because I think our culture, and you can interpret that how you want, actually does inform the way that we see the table and even, subsequently how we create community.
I love that question because you're so right. And for me, my cultural heritage would be Southern. I mean, is that even a thing? My husband's side note, my husband's cultural heritage is he grew up in a biracial family, and his dad was from Mexico and his mom was from East Texas. And so he had a different kind of rich cultural heritage, which definitely influences our family. But for me, it was Southern, which meant that we found every occasion for gathering, it needed to be orchestrated by like food and family recipes. And so I have lots of memories of spending summers with my grandmothers who both cooked. And I remember biscuits and gravy in the morning at my one grandmother's house. And I remember being in my other grandmother's kitchen and her teaching me how to make the most amazing pie crust, which is still a huge part of our family. It's like always in the rotation because I'm a pie lover, and I kind of attribute that to her. Both of my parents also cook. My dad was a great cook. My mom is a phenomenal cook and has really influenced me as far as being in the kitchen and enjoying our family and our lives around the table and around those recipes that really have such nostalgia and meaning to us.
So, is there a specific place that you grew up or like a city that you feel really tied to that plays into that? Because you're saying like Southern culture, which is definitely a thing, and hospitality is
Mhm.
such a part of that. But where did you feel drawn to, or
As a young child, my dad had various jobs that led us in different places in Texas. And so Houston was a huge part of my growing up. I actually spent most of my high school years there in Houston area, but we spent a lot of time with our family and they lived in East Texas in these little tiny small towns. So you're right. Southern can mean a lot of things. So I would have to say Southeast Texas, Southern.
okay.
And
Yeah.
whatever that means. I also spent some time living in Alaska and the Virgin Islands when I was a child. I wasn't really in the kitchen a lot at that stage of life, but it did open my eyes and I think my experience to just other cultures and the world in general and people, which is really a dear place for me, especially as an adult now knowing that I've, lived a lot of places.
Yeah, well, let's get into what this looked like for you once you got married and as an adult, because I know that that took you to live in a couple of different countries. Share with us what that journey was like. Where did you live, and how did that shape your attitudes about food and community?
My husband's job really led us um, to places we had never been and around people we had never met. And I think the tally we're at now is we've lived in 10 different cities and on 3 different continents. And we're now in our 14th home. And, it's a wonderful experience, but it's also a hard experience pulling up your family and having kids in tow and going to these new places. And it can feel very isolating. And I learned to stop asking God, why does this keep happening? Why are we moving? I know my husband has a job and that's awesome, but I had to start asking him really what he was trying to teach me. And that really changed everything. And God used this kind of nomadic life. I mean, we were moving every few years over and over for decades, and that was the pattern in our life for a long time. But the Lord used that to really teach me not only the value of, but the art of fostering friendship and cultivating strong communities. And food and hospitality, that was the framework. It was the on ramp to really cultivate that. Because what I found in living in all these different places is food is a great connector. And God created it that way. I mean, regardless of our background, our experience, our culture, our age, food just levels the playing field for so many of us and blurs those dividing lines and just brings us together. And I got a taste of what that was like. And then I didn't want to live any other way. So that experience of us moving so often and living in these foreign places really shaped who we are, how we use our home, how we see other people, and this idea of gathering around food to cultivate genuine friendship.
I love your heart in that. And that's definitely something that we share. So I want to get in the kitchen with you in some
Mm-hmm.
of those places. Like paint the picture for us, maybe in one or two of the countries that you lived. And what are some of your favorite foods that you learned to make in those places?
I feel like this could be its own podcast. Like the
For
entire time
sure.
we could just talk about traveling and food and experiences. I'll highlight a few of them for us. So we lived in Belgium for a few years, and that was our first overseas assignment. And so, of course, everything was brand new and amazing. But one of my favorite memories, we lived in this small Flemish town, which Belgium is kind of split. Well, Brussels, we lived outside of Brussels, and it's kind of split down the middle. Half is French influenced and half is German influenced. And that's Flemish is just kind of the slang term for that German community. And so we lived in a little Flemish community. And on the weekends, at the top of our street, they had what they would call a frit stand. Now, frits are French fries, but the Belgians are like, oh no, we invented French fries. And so they don't call them French fries, they call them Brits. And they had this stand, it was a mom and pop kind of food truck. And they were there with their big potato cutter and they were cutting the potatoes fresh and then they would double fry them, which is interesting because I have a family recipe where I make homemade French fries in a cast iron skillet and I fry them on two different temperatures. And so that was really cool for me to get to see it. So they double fry them so they're crispy on the outside, soft on the inside. And they have all these sauces and they wrap them in a paper cone and they give you your sauce and then you're on your way. And they are the best French fries I've ever had. So that is a really sweet memory for us and our family and something we would look forward to on the weekends. Of course, while living in Belgium, we traveled to Italy. And, if there's a place that you can talk about food, it's that place. And I'll tell you one specific thing that really changed kind of the way I looked at spices and food. We were staying in Tuscany at a friend's house, and she said, you have to go to this restaurant for dinner. And so she watched our kids. We went on a date and we went and had dinner at this amazing family owned restaurant. The food was phenomenal. And she said, you have to order the dessert that is cantaloupe ice cream with cayenne pepper. And I'm thinking, what? Doesn't sound, but it was life-changing. I mean, I know that's kind of dramatic, but seriously, who would put cayenne pepper on ice cream? But that combination really opened my eyes to so much in the area of food. And then the other place that we lived was Singapore. And so we had this whole world of Asian food available to us because Singapore is kind of a melting pot of a lot of the countries surrounding it. And they have this place. I don't know if you've seen Crazy Rich Asians.
One of my faves.
And it's so good because you get a window into like what food is for that culture, which is so fun. And they have these places called hawker centers. And just think of like open air food courts. You have all these stalls of different kinds of food influenced from all these surrounding countries and the cultures that live in Singapore. And it's very affordable, but it is so good. And so that's one of our favorite memories we have as a family of having dumplings and chicken rice and noodles and like pork belly and all of these amazing roti prata, all of these amazing treats. And then the tropical fruit, there's just nothing like it. So that's another memory I have of living in Singapore. And while we were in Singapore, and I'll share this little story because it really says a lot about culture and food. We were visiting Vietnam with some friends. We were going on a hike through the Sapa Valley region, which imagine just terraced rice fields that are beautiful and green. And you have these little villages like dotted along these terraces. And so we started our morning hike fueled by pho. And so pho is this brothy, like the broth has been made for hours and hours. Brothy soup with noodles and aromatics. And that was my first time ever eating that. And I thought, okay, where's this been all my life? Because it's freezing, it's cold, and you're going to hike. And it's like the best thing to warm your soul and fill your belly. And then at the end of our hike, we stopped in this little village and this woman's straw hut. I mean, we're sitting in her kind of yard and she makes this delicious stir fry lunch for us over an open flame and this huge wok that she's probably had for like generations. And we just sat in her yard with her and we talked about life and what it was like for each of us and laughed and ate amazing food. And again, God was teaching me that like he created all these amazing flavors and all of these different cultures and types of people. And actually that connects us. It brings us together our uniqueness. So that was a very impactful experience, getting to live overseas and taste the food and experience the people and hear the stories. And so my kids love when I make Asian food. That's one of their favorite things because of these memories.
Goodness, I love these memories. Okay, I'm trying not to drool on myself here because I just took this trip with you and I had frites and I had cantaloupe and cayenne. Was it ice cream or sorbet? And oh my goodness, pho is actually one of my favorites. It's like a healing soup to me. So honestly,
Mm.
the couple times I've had COVID or I've been really sick, I was just like, I need you to order pho. Like that was what I
Yes.
did with my family. And I live in Fresno, California. So we have a lot of pho restaurants here because we have a pretty large population of Vietnamese and Hmong. And all of our restaurants are numbered. So I live near Pho 777 and I got them on speed dial for when I am sick. So
It is the
yeah.
best. It is the best. It really does something to your body. Healing. I agree with you. I do the same thing. So good.
So amazing. Well, and what I love is that little bit deeper thread that you're pulling for us here too. And that's that in going to these different countries and living in them and experiencing these very signature dishes or signature meals, that it's also an invitation for us to experience the world and to experience God's glory. And that's what we're all about here
Mm.
on the Global Glory Chasers podcast is seeing the world through food, books, and travel, and how God's glory is exemplified in that. So, thank you. Thanks for inviting us along. And I love that the places that you described, the memories you described, are in such diverse places too,
Mm.
geographically, and their food profiles are different. So, I have to circle back to the cantaloupe and cayenne because you said that having that really changed you, and I want to hear more about that because I think of those two things as such high contrast. And I'm wondering, what came out of tasting that for the first time.
Well, okay, the first thing that came out of that was, when I think of if I'm going to make ice cream, I'm not necessarily thinking I'm going to make cantaloupe ice cream. We think of vanilla or chocolate or cookies and cream or maybe strawberry. So that kind of broadened my thinking as far as like, okay, there are other flavors that you can pull into a frozen dessert that I wouldn't have thought of. And I have since made that, by the way, and it is really good, especially when they're in season and they need to be really, really ripe. So I learned a new way to use cantaloupe that I just would not have done otherwise. And then the contrast of how, again, I just think, God is so creative and he's so into these details. And then he gives us the ability to play around with this and use it. I mean, he didn't have to make food with all these amazing flavors, but he did. And so it kind of highlighted just how creative God is for me, and then also helped me in the kitchen in my creativity to try things that maybe I would not have thought of and that wouldn't necessarily go together intuitively, because that spice brings out a certain sweetness in the cantaloupe ice cream, just like putting cayenne in chocolate. It just intensifies the chocolateness. I don't know how else to say it. So I will mention, since you brought us back there, they had another dessert that was similar that we tried, equally fantastic. And I haven't tried to make this one yet. Maybe I need to pull this into the kitchen, but they had a pistachio ice cream and they topped that one with black pepper. Yes. So another combination you wouldn't have thought of, but it really intensified the flavor of the pistachio.
So I'm loving
So
this
good.
because I do see that so often this is true in our lives, that the bitter comes with the sweet, and when you have those together, or the spice comes with that just layer of sugar, and when those come together, that the experience is so much richer. I can
Mm,
think about tragic things that have happened in my own life and how the grief that I experienced enabled me to see God's glory in such a
Mm,
more colorful way. And I think about, challenges that I've gone through with my kids and how it was those very challenges that have shaped their character or maybe even their passions for the future. And it's exemplified in our food. The Italians do it really well,
mhm.
actually. I'm a bit biased, but
You're so right. And you know what I keep thinking as I'm listening to you talk about that? I'm thinking about my time at the Open Door Sisterhood retreat. And as someone who loves and God knit me to feed people and nourish people and make amazing food and serve and create these experiences, the contrast of that, of me being on the receiving end where I got to receive the food that you and your sister made and fed us meal after meal. I mean, it had such a deep impact on me. It really allowed me, like, God was like, I'm going to allow you to sit in the seat and I'm going to allow you to feel what that feels like to be nourished and fed and seen in that way and loved in that way. That to me was a contrast because it's not normally the seat I'm sitting in, but it really impacted me. And the Lord used that to nourish my soul and allow me to just, I don't know, have another window into this is who I've made you and this is the impact it can have on other people.
I love hearing that. First of all, that blesses me. Thank you for sharing that. But
Mm,
also, I know what it feels like because I got to go on that retreat myself and be nourished in that way. And I'm thinking about how in the Bible, there are so many beautiful stories about how transformation happened around the table or in the context of food, and how Jesus so often ministered to people not by just like, here, let me drop some awesome advice, but like, actually, let
mhm,
me feed you and let me provide living water for you where you're thirsty. And then transformation results from that and the deeper teaching that he brings out of it. I'm going to
mm.
just throw this out there for you because you're nodding. Are there any stories that come to mind for you that have been really meaningful about food in God's word?
Mm. You know what the visual that I'm getting as we're talking about this? I'm thinking the Chosen series.
TV series, one of my favorites. I
Yes. So those are the pictures that I feel like are being painted in my mind of they were at whose house were they at where they were all celebrating and they were coming together. Oh yeah, it was Mary and Martha. I mean that really kind of spoke to me because I, can relate to feeling like I'm, tending to all the things that need to be tended to and feeding and serving and providing for people. But it was a beautiful picture of like being present and really intentional about the people because ultimately, and this is one of the things that I say to women often who think my house has to be perfect, my food has to be perfect, my family has to be perfect. And that's a unicorn that no one possesses. It's just not realistic. And honestly, they actually may forget the decor of your house. They may forget even the menu you served them and what your napkins looked like, but they will always remember the way that you made them feel.
Mm.
And that really is how we're going to nourish people to the core of their souls. And so that story in the Bible of Mary and Martha and Jesus so gently reminding her of what really matters in the end is a great lesson for us as we host, as we gather, as we invite, as we love food and we give that gift to other people. Remember seeing them and then feeling seen and heard is going to matter above all else. If our roasted chicken fails, so be it. The people and the connection really, really matters above all of that.
Love that you said that. And I think, that is such a powerful story. We'll link it in our show notes too, if you're not, for listeners who might not be familiar with it. But just to describe the scene a little bit, Mary and Martha are these two sisters, and Jesus and the disciples come and they are preparing this meal, but it's Mary who chooses to sit at Jesus' feet. And I've done a little studying in that context. Like, she truly actually is going to learn from him, like the other men, the other disciples who are there. And he is like the rabbi, the teacher. And so she pauses from her work of cleaning and preparing and giving the food and all of that. But meanwhile, her sister then, Martha, is in the kitchen, and she's, feeling a little slighted that her sister isn't helping her. And it is such a powerful scene because I'm the one who could probably more naturally be in the kitchen and be doing all the things and making sure the to-do list is done, and, putting the final touches on the dishes before they come out on the table. And that scene has, I'll say, schooled me so much, so that when I think about friends coming over, now the way that it reorients my brain is, okay, what can I prepare in advance so that I can spend that time truly at the table listening and learning from my people. And so that's a little different, because otherwise we get obsessed with the perfectionism, as you were kind of saying before. But when people come in the door, if we think, oh, our main goal right now is to sit with them and to listen and to learn, it just it turns the motive completely.
Yes. Thank you for describing that scene. I think that's really helpful. And what a great tip to just be mindful of, okay, I want to be present. I want to be available. So how can I back into that space with my planning? Because planning is still necessary. And it makes a huge difference if you can have things that you can serve at room temperature. I'm a huge make ahead gal. So what can you make ahead, do ahead, plan ahead to have already set? And the other thing that I was just going to mention is, one of the questions that I get asked often from people who want to host are like, oh my gosh, what do you do about people who come early and you're still in the zone? And it's really hard to be present in that moment with people when you're trying to finalize things. Here are a couple of tips. You need to always have a task that person can do, because they're there early. They're probably like, hey, what can I do? What can I help with? Having them serve drinks to people who arrive is a great option. Having them light candles, having them put things on the table. So have a task, and then have some questions in your back pocket that you can ask them so that they can be talking and sharing and carrying a conversation. I mean, and you get to know them. It's great. People generally enjoy talking about themselves. So it's a great way to get to know people, and you can kind of stay focused on your little tasks at hand.
So good. Okay. You totally anticipated where I was going with this too. Because one of the things I love about following you on Instagram is that you share these little practical tips on ways that people can plan and prepare and, have things that are accessible so others can help with, the setting of the table or even the prep of the food. And yeah, we can't prepare for everything. And there's going to be, perhaps that surprise guest. It seems like in this case, like Jesus and the disciples were even surprise guests at Mary and Martha's table. But we can think about some of those little things in advance. And I love learning that from you. So thanks for sharing some of those tips. And I hope that people will go follow Krisi on Instagram, because she makes these really fun reels where she talks about some of those tips. I want to ask about hospitality. How would you describe hospitality to people, and what encouragement would you give for our listener who wants to grow in this area of hospitality?
So at its core, hospitality is really a heart issue. It's not, the days of yore of entertaining. It's kind of the modern hospitality is really, we all long to belong, to connect, and to be part of something. So hospitality is just a willingness. That's the heart issue, to open our home and our lives in order to really nurture and foster those connections with people in our sphere. And I know that can, in and of itself, can be intimidating. And I think a few things that I would offer as an encouragement is, first of all, this phrase that I learned from Jill Briscoe that my kids know very well, because I used it when I was raising them, and they would always say things like, oh, I can't do this as good as you, Mom. Will you do it? And this is what I would say to them, and this is what I would say to us who want to host. Do it badly until you can do it goodly. And I learned that from Jill, because honestly, we'll never do it goodly if we don't start and be willing to do it badly. And that needs to be okay. I mean, we're not here to be our perfect selves. We're here to be an authentic self, because that's what's attractive. That's what's going to draw people in. And that's what we need. I mean, we need those people just as much as they need a place to gather. We need those relationships. So do it badly until you do it goodly. Also, another thing that has helped me over the years is partnering with a friend. Don't feel like you have to do everything on your own and recreate the whole wheel. You know, find a neighbor, find a friend. I mean, I've sat at a scrapbooking table back in the day when people scrapbook in a brand new town. And my friend looked at me and she was like, hey, I'm kind of lonely. And I would be like, girl, I just moved here. I don't know anyone. I'm with you. And she's like, let's just start a Bible study. How about that? So we did. We partnered together and we gathered some women, and we, took turns making treats. So I would partner with someone to just carry the load, and you have that shared experience if you want to start hosting or gathering. And then the third thing I would say, and it's kind of a twofer. One, don't be afraid to outsource. And in that vein, have an anchor dish. I think this is one of my biggest pieces of advice. Have an anchor dish. That's a dish that you know how to make, you've made before, everyone loves, you're comfortable with, and then build around it. So let's say your anchor dish, let's just think outside the box. Let's say your anchor dish is homemade bread. You bake bread. I mean, good for you. Outsource the lasagna. Don't feel like you've got to make homemade bread and a whole lasagna, for example. And then partner with a friend to bring the salad. And then that girlfriend who you can always count on to be coming in hot, but you can call her at the last minute and be like, can you grab tea, iced tea, because we need drinks. So partner and outsource and find your anchor dish that you're comfortable with. And that can be a dessert, by the way.
I love that. The anchor dish, I heard you share about this at the retreat, and I love the way that you framed that. And I think it really is encouraging for people on all sides of the spectrum in terms of food and their experience with food, because there's that one thing that you love to make, or that is just, that signature dish, or even maybe it's like a recipe like we were talking about before that is passed down through the generations. It's mama's Italian meat sauce, or it's, the biscuits and gravy that you mentioned that bring back those memories. I love the idea that we could build around that, and we don't have to have every single piece of the meal perfect. I have learned too that others love to participate. And so if we give them an assignment, hey, bring a dessert or bring an appetizer, and then we let them choose, it's kind of the potluck idea, but I like to orchestrate it in it just to make sure okay, we got the main dish, we got the side dish, we got the appetizer, we got the dessert. I'll just tell them the category, and then they get to participate in the way that feels fun or creative to them, or they can just, go to the store and buy chips and salsa, whatever.
Yeah. I kind of call that the modern potluck, where you should know your people, and the person, like I said, your friend who she's not really going to cook, but she is going to be your last minute. I can stop by and get the chips and salsa, or get the thing that you forgot. And then you have the friend or the family member who you give them a recipe and they're good to go, and it's going to be fantastic. And then you have the friend that you're like, okay, whatever dessert in the dessert category you want to come up with, that they'll crush it. And so I love this idea that you mentioned of really potlucking, but in a modern way, where there's a little bit of structure and plan, I guess. And that way we all get to participate. There's kind of a new trend. I don't know if you've heard about it, where it's I can't think of, it's a cookbook club, basically. Cook the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that's a fun idea. That would be a really fun baby step way to start, where you get a cookbook and you gather some friends and say, okay, everyone's going to pick something from this cookbook, and we're going to eat and cook and enjoy time together.
Again, it's that place where we can come together as community. We can experience God's glory in each other. I get to see those gifts, those, even the places where maybe people need help, how do you use this knife in a way that is safe and that is going to create most efficiently some of those types of things that when we're together in the kitchen that can happen. Chrissy, okay, last question. This is my rapid fire question for you before we sign off, because clearly I could talk to you about food all day long. But do you have a favorite item that you love to have in your kitchen? Maybe a gadget or something you can't do without.
Something that's not a food item, I would say a quality chef's knife is my workhorse, and that's something that I use just about every time I'm in my kitchen. And I also really like my pepper grinder because, and this is gonna like sound like maybe I'm older than I am, or maybe I'm this old, I don't know. But I have arthritis in an area of my hand, and the pepper grinder is that I use is awesome because it's an action. It goes like this, and so the action goes back and forth over the top of the pepper grinder, and it's really easy on your wrist. All that to say, the pepper grinder
Amazing.
is awesome.
I love it. Okay. So
Yeah,
those are the two gadgets. We'll definitely have to, well, I don't know if a knife is a gadget, but a knife is definitely
right.
important. And so I want to know, can you tell us like what is your secret favorite knife? Is there a brand or
Mm,
a
I really
category?
like, yeah, I have the knife that I'm using a lot right now is the brand is Misen, Misen. And I have a couple of them and they stay sharp really long and they have the like the steel forged full tang where the steel goes all the way through the handle. And so they're really, really sturdy. You can really get a good quality chef's knife without having to spend a lot of money. I just think that is your number one knife to get a good quality one because it makes cooking so much more enjoyable that when you have a knife that will stay sharp and that will perform the task it's supposed to. And so it's just an all around great workhorse. My other thing that I use all the time, I just thought of, is my little garlic mincer. Okay. So it's not a garlic press, it's a mincer and it has all these little holes in it. And you put it over top of the garlic and you rock it back and forth and it minces the garlic for you, which is great if you don't like to have, that garlic all on your fingers.
Ooh, okay. We're going to have to check these out. We'll definitely put them in the show notes as we're getting towards the holidays. Maybe these are some good stocking stuffers that
Mm.
people can use for family members who are especially foodies. Chrissy, this has been so fun. Thank you so much for just coming to the table, so to speak, with me today and talking about food, books, and travel. We are big fans of yours and so excited about just so much great content that you're putting out. And we will have people follow you over on Instagram. Where else can they find you?
I'm also on TikTok and YouTube, and then I have a blog that I have recipes on and stories and resources. And then I
Per-
also put out a monthly newsletter that is kind of a deeper dive into just happenings in our home. And there's usually a full YouTube exclusive video of me walking through some kind of recipe.
Oh, fantastic. Okay. I'm going to
Yeah.
sign up for that right now. I'm so excited. Thank you for being with us here today on the Global Glory Chasers podcast.
Thanks, Dorina. This was a blast.
So today, my friend Chrissy shared with you two Global Glory Chasers recommendations. I always like to feature three. She talked about her favorite knife and her favorite garlic mincer, which we will link in the show notes if you want to check those out, especially for all of my foodie friends out there or people who maybe have foodies in your family, cooks who love to receive fun cooking gifts. These are great as you're thinking maybe even about stocking stuffers or hospitality gifts that you would like to offer to people. But I also wanted to feature one of my own recommendations for this episode. And this is actually a brand new cookbook called Sabbath Soup. My friend Kathy Lipp, who is the author of The Accidental Homesteader, also created this book, which was just released this month. And Sabbath Soup includes weekly menus and rhythms to make space for a day of rest. This is a gorgeous cookbook that my friend Kathy did, and I love that it includes very doable and creative recipes, but along with it, there is so much encouragement. And she talks about the different seasons, she talks about the idea of Sabbath and why it is important for us, but also how we can prepare for Sabbath. And I wanted to give you just a little hint of Kathy's beautiful writing and her invitation through this book. So I'm going to read to you from the introduction of Sabbath Soup, and it is titled Why Sabbath? So she includes this quote from Thomas à Kempis. It says, "The further the soul is from the noise of the world, the closer it may be to its creator. For God, with his holy angels, will draw close to a person who seeks solitude and silence." And here's Kathy's writing. She says, "Beneath the loud hum of our hustle, there is the still, small voice that invites us to step away from producing and rushing so we can spend time in his presence, being restored and blessed. God, being the kind guide and Abba that he is, asks us to commit to something for our own wellness and wholeness. You won't hear an argument from me, not one problematic peep, when God tells me to step away from the computer and curl up for a midday nap instead. Setting aside and respecting a holy time of rest is more than a command, it is a gift." Mark 2:27 says, "The Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath." Because it was made for us, embracing Sabbath shifts a daily, nothing special experience into a mysteriously divine one. We transform a time of renewal into a spiritual practice. We bring meaning to the smallest of routines. We elevate a simple meal to a sacred ritual of connection and gratitude. And those changes have nothing to do with what we wear, serve, do, or the social status of who we feed. It has everything to do with the state of our heart. And believe me, I understand that it isn't always easy to get to that state of heart and mind. I mean, we're living full lives that are demanding on even the slow days, right? My prayer for this book, with its recipes, ideas for Sabbath living, practical steps, and compassionate prayers, is that it will help you enter that state of the heart and mind with surprising ease. As you personalize routines and rituals, you will uncover a Sabbath way of going about your week. You'll find new ways of viewing tasks and priorities, serving your people, cultivating your own wellness, and connecting with the Creator, who is eager for you to rest in Him. I can wholeheartedly say I wish I had answered God's invitation to Sabbath living much earlier in life. So those are the words, just a couple of paragraphs from my friend Kathy Lipp's new book, which is out from the Peaks Press. And it is a great book to add to your Amazon list or to purchase for fall. I know this time of year, I am always hankering for some good soup. There's some great soup recipes in here, but there's also a bunch of other recipes. And I love Kathy's invitation into Sabbath through this book. Well, friends, thank you for joining us here for season 5, episode 7 of the Global Glory Chasers podcast, which is made possible and ad free by generous supporters through Substack. So you can sign up for my free Glorygram, which is my weekly newsletter. It includes recipes, it includes an essay with encouragement and other great recommendations. You can get that for free, or you can become a paid subscriber. And by paying even $5 a month, which is how much the subscription costs, you can support my podcast so that I can continue this good work. You can find details over at dorinaglorygram.substack.com, and that link is in the show notes. We will be right back here next Wednesday to drop our next episode of Global Glory Chasers. And I just want you to know, I appreciate your support so much. If you're not financially in a place where you can give, one of the things that you can do, which is absolutely free, is you can subscribe to the podcast and you can hop over to iTunes or whichever platform you use and share a little recommendation or review of the podcast. And that helps other friends find Global Glory Chasers. So I want to just invite you to invest in that way, and let's chase God's glory together.